Hello and welcome to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. Is this the beginning of the end or the end of the beginning? Does Israel's massive attack near Damascus days ago widen Syria's raging civil war? What are the chances Iran and Hezbollah could be directly drawn into this conflict? Then there's the issue of chemical weapons. Should Western support of Assad's enemies be withdrawn if it is proven the rebels are using them against their own people? To CrossTalk Syria, I'm joined by Pepe Escobar in London. He is an investigative journalist and author. In Washington, we have Christopher Chivas. He is a senior political scientist at the RAND Corporation and an adjunct professor at Johns Hopkins University. And in New York, we cross to Jeffrey Ingersoll. He is a defense reporter with Business Insider. All right, gentlemen, CrossTalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want. Pepe, if I can go to you first, it looks like there's more and more effort to inflame the conflict in Syria than resolve it. Would you agree or disagree with that?
This is just the beginning, you know. I'm tempted to start, singing a little bit, Peter. What a wonderful world this would be, according, obviously, to NATO GCC. This is what they're trying, you know. It's the same old story. The US, the Brits, and the French inside NATO. The Brits and the French are trying to convince the other NATO members that lethal weaponizing of the rebels is the way to go. The GCC, of course, those paragons of democracy, including the House of Saud, of course, which has been doing that for, in fact, over 2 years now, in the black market, via Croatia, you name it. And, of course, Israel. Israel just jumped in because the plan A, which was the lethal weaponizing of the rebels, was not working. There was this red line after red line. Everybody got lost in this Hollywood shuffle. At the same time, they noticed that the Syrian army was progressing instead of regressing in the Hama Homs corridor in Syria. So the so-called rebels, the Free Syrian Army gangs and Jabhat al-Nusra style jihadis were losing ground. And at the same time, Sheikh Nasrallah went to Iran. He had a get-together with Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei. They are very tight, so an attack on each one of them is an attack on all of them. So what to do? Plan B. Call Israel, something that was already decided between Chuck Hagel and his tour of the Middle East recently, Israel and the petromonarchies. Israel does it. If there are Fateh 110 missiles struck by Israel, good for Israel. If they are not, they still deplete Syrian army arsenal, and we start all over again with Plan B. So I expect more attacks sooner rather than later.
Chris, what do you think about that? Plan B?
Well, I mean, I think that the purposes for Israel's strike were the Fateh 110 missiles. I wouldn't read into it too much more than that. After all, Israel has conducted strikes against Syria even before this war started out. Their primary concern right now is Hezbollah. Were Hezbollah to get those kinds of missiles, it would pose a significant threat to Israel's air defense system, and that's obviously not something that they can allow to happen.
Okay, Jeffrey, you want to weigh in? Plan B, as Pepe said.
I think that Iran is basically trying to use Syria as a smokescreen and all the chaos there as a smokescreen to smuggle weapons to Hezbollah. It's as simple as that. So Israel simply, took those weapons out. As far as Syria is concerned, that's a big messy sandwich, and everyone's going to have to take a bite. It's not as simple as arming rebels. We don't really know who we're arming. It's a whole lot more fractious than we think. We're not even sure that what's going to replace Assad is going to be better. Maybe a year ago, maybe. But honestly, right now, I just think that it's a mess, and it's only going to get messier.
Pepe, you want to jump in there? Talk Iran.
In fact, all of U.S. think tank land, left, right, middle, whatever, they know that Washington is selling itself the myth that the CIA is screening which weapons go to which groups. This is completely absurd. Obviously, these people have never been to Syria. They have never been to the Turkish-Syrian border, and they don't know the players. you know, Saudi Arabia and Qatar, their agenda is not Washington's agenda. It's completely different. Qatar, they want some kind of Muslim Brotherhood-led government in Syria. And the House of Saud, they want a Wahhabi emirate, which is going to breed lots of Al-Qaeda-style types later on. Their agenda is completely different, and they are arming themselves. Sometimes it goes through Turkey. Sometimes it's screened by the CIA in southern Turkey. But we don't know who gets these weapons, you know, at the last resort. And most of these people are getting the weapons indirectly are Jabhat al-Nusra, because they have very good connections, for instance, with the tribal sheikhs in Al-Anbar province in Iraq. A lot of commanders that affiliated with Jabhat al-Nusra, they're not Syrians, they're Iraqis. They were fighting the Americans in Anbar province 2004, 2005, 2006. I met some of these people at the time over there, and now they're in Syria. They are doing the back and forth across the border.
Okay, Jeffrey, you were agreeing. Go ahead.
Well, you know, I think that Iraq has a lot to do with it. Their civil war, then let's call it what it is. It's a civil war. Is spilling into Syria. Everyone's trying to get their piece of bread, get the big piece of bread here. And Pepe's right. You know, the CIA, it's the same old song and dance. They've been doing it for 40 years. They did it with the Taliban. You saw what happened there. And it's, you know, there's no excuse for it, really. And yeah, they are selling. There's a couple things that they're selling. One thing that they're selling that they tried to sell late last year was that the FSA was this united, you know, Western-style military, and that's anything but the case. Yeah. They're totally fractious, and they're fighting amongst each other. They're fighting Jabhat al-Nusra, and everyone's vying for power right now. So, you know, there's really only two good options here I see. One would be that we're able to keep Assad in power, and he's able to come to an agreement with the rebels in which they all get a piece of the pie, something kind of like how Lebanon's government is. And the other one is if the FSA can unite, and I just don't see that happening. And the more that we arm these guys, the worse off it's going to be. I mean, Libya is still a mess, and you saw that that's spilled south into Africa. It's just a giant mess, and giving them weapons isn't going to solve anything. So I honestly, I think that's why Obama is sort of in a tough position here politically. You know, he wanted to talk tough. Every American president does. But really, what's he going to do? He's not even sure what he's going to do. And now they're sort of backpedaling because they don't really have intel on these guys. They don't really know who they are. And you can't just go, you know, dropping weapons willy-nilly. So it's really a tough situation, and Iraq is in the shadows, and I'll tell you what, if that erupts right along with Syria, which I think it's going to, it's just going to be horrible. It's going to be horrific, and I don't think that there's anything that Obama, France, or Britain can really do about it other than to just let it play out.
Okay, Chris, let it play out. Interesting.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
if I can just say, I mean, I think, you know, I don't know who Pepe's been talking to. I mean, he paints an interesting picture, but it's certainly not the same people in Washington think tank circles who I've been talking to, many of whom have no illusions about the difficulties that are involved in trying to arm the opposition. It's pretty widely known that there are a lot of risks, and as he noted, there's obviously risks that arms could get into the hands of nefarious groups like Jabhat al-Nusra. Nevertheless, the fact of the matter is that, you know, and respectfully, I disagree that there's any solution in which Assad is going to remain in power. That's simply not going to happen. We need to be thinking about a post-Assad Syria that protects all of the parties involved, and that includes the Alawites. And here's where I think actually Russia has an important role to play. Russia can look beyond, you know, the crisis today and think about, you know, what role it can play constructively in the future in trying to guarantee the security of the post-Assad
It's been trying to do that for 2
groups.
years. It's been trying to do that for 2 years. And no one wants to listen. Pepe, jump in.
Absolutely. They've been trying to do that, and the Americans have been saying no. Because Obama, you know, one of the first Obama lines is Assad had to go. Yeah. And now the Obama administration is saying, look, after 2 years, he's not going. He still has support in Damascus. The business classes in Damascus and Aleppo, there are no major defections in the Syrian army. I have to say that every day, because people in America, they are not listening. 1 or 2 generals that defect after a few months, these are not major defections. They still control the army. They are fully weaponized. So it's not going to happen. The only possible solution, I agree, from the beginning, Russia was proposing that. Let's sit down at the same table, all the players, including all the regional players, and that includes Iran as well at the table. And the Americans have been saying no.
In a situation like this, it's
you can't just look
thinking.
beyond Assad. You have to do something to get beyond Assad.
Chris, jump in. Go ahead.
What exactly are we going to do? I mean, we're talking about beyond Assad as if it's already been written. Okay. How exactly do we do that? Because I'll tell you what, he's shown recently that his military is quite capable of pushing the rebels back.
Okay, Chris.
So what do we do? Airstrikes?
Let's go to Chris first. Gentlemen, let's go to Chris.
Insurgencies like this.
Chris, go ahead.
Insurgencies like this, last for decades. There's no way that Assad could potentially hold on to power for a number of years, if the international community continues not to take any kind of action. But in the end, he's going to go. And the question is, what's going to happen then? I agree with you about that. And the reality is that we need to do everything we can to protect all sides, including the Alawites in Syria, from some kind of a major slaughter. And that's going to require a lot more international cooperation, including between Russia, the United States, and NATO, and our partners in the region than we're getting right now.
Pepe, go ahead.
Now, not only the Alawites, Christians and Kurds as well. The Kurds, they are in northeast Syria. They already have a measure of independence. So in practical terms, it's autonomy. They would love that to continue, in fact. The Christians know that if there is a Wahhabi-style Sunni hardcore post-Assad government, they are doomed. And so are the Alawites as well. So if you have everybody at the same table, of course, with Russia, Iran, and the Saudis, and all the GCC petromonarchies, plus the Westerners, then at least some sort of adult conversation can ensue. They're not even talking at the moment.
All right, gentlemen, I have to jump in here. We're going to go to a short break, and after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on Syria. Stay with our team. Welcome back to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're discussing the crisis in Syria. Okay, Chris, in Washington, let's talk more about Hezbollah and Iran. Do you think it's possible they're going to be drawn into this conflict even more now after the Israeli strike?
I think it certainly is possible. I mean, my view is people have been debating whether or not this is, trending towards a broader regional conflict. I think it already is a regional conflict. I mean, we have reports of direct exchanges of fire between Hezbollah and the opposition forces in Syria. We have reports of Iranian forces on the ground aiding the regime. We obviously now have this Israeli airstrike, even if it's carried out for another purpose. The regime's response clearly indicates that they view that as a direct attack on them and part of the broader conflict. And then obviously we have the situation in Iraq, which is difficult not to link to the situation in Syria. So I think, it really is already a regional crisis. And the question is only how much worse does it get? How much worse do we allow it to get?
Jeff, how much worse can it get?
Oh, it can get much worse. And like I said, I don't see any solution. I don't see any quick solution happening simply by arming the rebels. But in terms of Hezbollah and Iran, I mean, they're already involved in the conflict. They've been involved in the conflict because Assad is their blue chip. How else is Hezbollah going to get armed? I mean, that's their main route, is right through Syria. So, I just think that the idea of looking at this in terms of borders is, it's naive. Not to say that anyone here is doing that, but they're already involved in fighting. They already have boots on the ground, and they're already trying to shore up Assad as much as possible. So they're deeply invested, and they want to keep Assad in place. Otherwise, Hezbollah is not going to be able to mount assaults on Israel as well as they can with supplies from Iran.
May I jump in?
Go ahead, Pepe. Go ahead.
Peter?
Go ahead.
To answer your question, we have to wait a little bit. It depends on what's going to happen in the Iranian presidential elections next month. All the candidates so far, they are very, very close to Khamenei. So this is not going to change. This means they are very, very close with the Revolutionary Guards as well. Syria is a red line for Tehran, and Hezbollah support is a red line for Tehran. How they are going to respond to what's going on at the moment, we're going to see maybe in 2 or 3 months after we have a new government in place, where we'll have a president answering directly to Khamenei policy and not clashing with him like Ahmadinejad and his cabinet. But the thing is, in terms of missiles, even if we don't know from any source whether Hezbollah bought these Fateh 110s from Iran. Even if they didn't, they have a similar missile, the M600, Syrian technology. It's almost as good as the Fateh 110s. So the case of if they were attacking Israel in the near future, they would use the M600s. They don't need the Fateh 110s. Of course, everybody is on the ground. Not only Iran and Syria and Hezbollah, but the GCC petromonarchies, especially the Emirates, Qatar, and the House of Saud, not to mention the logistical support of Syria. And yes, I agree with our other guest. It is already a regional conflict. It's going to get much worse, especially because the West, via US, Britain, and France, they see they are totally impotent to conduct anything on the ground. And now we have jihadis let loose inside Syria. We're going to have Hezbollah playing against Al-Qaeda, which is a neocon wet dream, of course. And we have the back and forth of jihadis between Iraq and Syria.
Chris, you want to jump in there?
Well, I just wanted to agree. I think with I think it was Jeff who said that that there's no easy solution to this. That this is going to take time. I mean, I think that's a reality that everyone is confronting, and I think that's clearly one of the reasons why you see the U.S. Administration taking it slow. It's obviously a situation where people want to act with a certain degree of caution and an understanding that there is no perfect answer to this. But again, I mean, I don't foresee any world in which the fighting ends and Assad is still in power. And I think that it's time that we all just accept that and move on to try and find some equitable and just solution to the problem with the full involvement of all of the interested international parties.
Okay, I mean,
Can I ask a question to our
go ahead,
both
Pepe.
our American guests?
Is it the West's responsibility to do this, all this, to change regime in Syria?
Peter, I'd like to ask our American guests a very important question. Bill Richardson, former governor of New Mexico, very close to the Clinton clan, he's been spinning since last Sunday that the Obama administration is seriously considering aerial strikes against Syria. Is there any degree of truth about that, or this is just spin?
Jeff, you want to answer that? Or Chris?
I don't think that that's going to happen anytime soon. I think that the Obama administration knows that they have to be patient. I think his red line talk was a little
wobbly.
He jumped the gun a little bit, although we don't want people to use chemical weapons. But no one's in a rush to go dropping bombs. It never looks good. It didn't look good even during Libya. And, of course, there's going to be American politicians, there's going to be hawks that are calling for it because it will obviously remove Assad sooner. But they're still not sure. Here's the thing. They're still not sure what's going to replace him. And if whatever replaces him, it could be friendly to Hezbollah. Who knows? It could be friendly to anyone who's willing to fight, even though they're Shia and Sunni. They could be friendly to anyone who's willing to fight the great devil. So I think that we want to sort of get a better bead for what's going on the ground before we start making any decisions like that. And that's quite a hasty decision. And the other thing is that it's going to be difficult to get a bead in terms of what's going on the ground. There's fighting street to street. And these guys are very fractious, and these rebel groups are they're fighting for their lives. So, it's hard to get good intel. I mean, as we saw with the chemical weapons use, it's very hard to get good intel. Good, solid intel. So I just think that they're going to be patient, and I think that they're not going to be in a rush to say anything that's going to get them in hot water.
Pepe, jump in. Go ahead.
Say again?
No, I was just adding that the UN, Carla Del Ponte, she's very, very tough and extremely credible. She said 2 days ago that recent gas was probably used by the rebels.
Yeah,
and now the UN is sort of backtracking, saying, oh, no, she did not say that exactly, you know.
Chris, what about the rebels using chemical weapons? No, let's go to Chris. Chemical weapons in the opposition, the rebels.
Yeah, let me just, just briefly on the question of, whether or not the United States is considering any kind of airstrikes against Syria. I mean, I have no special information, but I would frankly be surprised if it's not being considered right now, given the statements that have been made by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff publicly, I think last week or the week before.
Chris, would that be a good idea?
What a significant
Chris, would that be a good
idea?
In your opinion, would that be a good idea?
I think it's...
Chris?
I think it's obviously something that needs to be considered as part of a broader effort.
Chris, when does this ever work?
When
does this ever work? These interventions, when do they work?
It worked extremely well in Libya 2 years ago.
Oh, really?
That's
Today?
exactly what Martin Dempsey
Libya's a mess today.
Martin Dempsey said the same thing.
It's a mess today.
Because there was a no-fly zone.
Your question was about
they cannot impose a no-fly zone over Syria.
Gaddafi's Air Force and air defense systems. That was done handily in 72 hours. I don't think that we could take out
Assad's
because
air it's in the middle of the desert.
72 hours.
It's not the case in Syria.
But, for the United States military, especially working with NATO,
and it's a little
this is
more
something
iffy.
that can be handled. It would be very violent. There would be a lot of bombs.
Of course, that's what war is about.
There would be risk of civilian casualties. But there's no question about whether or not it could be done. I mean, that's purely academic.
I guess what it should be done, I guess. Jeff, let's talk about the issues with the rebels and chemical weapons. Go ahead.
I don't buy this whole UN report, straight up. They're just not capable. They don't have the capabilities to deliver these weapon systems. Assad does. So I would say, it's likely that it was the regime and not the rebels who were using these weapons. She's gotten out ahead of herself quite a few times before in terms of making these wild claims. I don't doubt the veracity of her research, but at the same time, she's thrown a couple red herrings in her career. So I think we should reserve judgment before we all pick up the football and start running with it here. I just don't think the rebels are capable yet, and these are very complex weapon systems. It's not easy to put these things together. So basically, yeah, I think that it's probably the regime using those weapons. It's not the rebels. I don't know how she got mixed up, but I'd be willing to bet she got mixed up.
Carla Del Ponte is not a suicidal operative. This is ridiculous. If she said that, it's because she has evidence. No wonder the UN started backtracking the day after. And no wonder the Americans were stalling this UN investigation from the beginning. Just talk to Sergei Lavrov. That's what I was going to tell you.
Okay, gentlemen, what about the possibility
it seems pretty clear
let's change gears here. Okay, Chris, what about partitioning the country?
Right.
Oh,
I think that's
the original
among the
plan,
multiple options that we need.
Go ahead, Chris.
Among the options that we need to, no one knows what's going to be the right solution for this right now. You simply can't predict this kind of thing in advance. But I think that partition is certainly one of the possible outcomes here. If it turns out that an internationally supported and UN-backed peace agreement that includes partition is possible, and that's going to stop the fighting, then absolutely, I think that should be on the table.
Pepe, you got the last word. 20 seconds.
And I'll add. Let me just add.
No, Pepe, 20 seconds. Go ahead. Jump in. Go ahead.
This is what Israel and the neocons have been dreaming for over 10 years. Just look at the Saban report about regime change and, of course, later maybe partitioning of Syria. Look at what Seymour Hersh was saying already in 2007. Okay, divide and rule, a weak Syria, divided into 3 warring feuds, just like Iraq is already partitioned in 3 states.
All right, gentlemen, I have to jump in here. We've run out of time. Fascinating discussion. Many thanks to my guests today in London, New York, and Washington. And thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time. And remember, CrossTalk rules.
I love you.